Hi, I'm Rachel, and today I'm going to be telling you all about Section 6 in the Milan Art Mastery Program. But first, I need to finish this painting. This is a subtractive city painting, and the only thing I need to do is add some opaques on the front to create a focal area that kind of pops out toward the viewer. I need to touch up the snow here, and I also need to work on this just a tad bit, so it's not going to take very long. And then I'll get back with you and let you know how Section 6, Week 6 went. See you in a bit. Welcome to Week 6 in the Milan Art Mastery Program. This week was the hardest week I've encountered yet so far. Why is that? Well, we were working on perspective drawing. Now, I have had perspective drawing in interior design school, and the difference is in interior design school, we had to build a grid, and then we would lay that grid underneath whatever drawing we were working on, and usually it was of interiors. So we would create a 3-point perspective grid from a certain vantage point, raising the horizon line to be eye level, which is typically around 5 feet tall. But for this one, we didn't actually have the vanishing points marked out on our paper, but you could kind of figure out where they were based on the angles of the lines. The difficult thing to me was the resource images that we were working from had a lot of windows that didn't line up like an architectural building would be that you would create nowadays. Some of these buildings in Venice, for example, are hundreds of years old, and I think that the way they were put together is just so haphazard. So I found it so difficult. Things were not tidy and neat, and I think that was the point of the project, is to work with something that is actually difficult. This was the first drawing that we made on perspective lines, and all we had to do was just do the line work. We could add a little bit of shading. All I added was some shading at the windows just to differentiate, because the drawing was so pale you couldn't see very much, so I just colored in a couple of the windows, not even all of them. These aren't colored, this is not colored in. But that way you can see a little bit about what is going on here in this picture. This is a canal, so this is water down here. But getting all these things accurately drawn to look like the reference photo was so tricky. They don't really line up with much of anything. These doorways are kind of random. The buildings in the back where you see there's an alleyway back here. And this building is actually slightly curved. So enough about that, but I found this one extremely challenging, and I thought, if this is the first drawing, what's the second one going to be like? Well, the second thing what we did was to start our subtractive painting of a city. The reference that I picked was of a building in New York City. I did a little bit of Googling and figured out that it is now called Delmonico's, which is a restaurant. I believe it's a restaurant. And it's a really attractive building. It looks kind of like the Flatiron building in New York City, but it's very golden yellow, and I really like the warm yellow tones, so I selected that one. The photograph was taken in winter, so there's snow on the ground. The snow is a little bit dirty in patches. And I was really scared to start that drawing because I saw all of the windows and in the foreground and in the skyscrapers in the background. I thought, there's no way I can get all those windows correct. But once I started the project, I discovered that it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. The first layer, we basically did something similar to the monster portrait. We laid down a background, a bunch of strokes, and then we subtracted out with our subtraction tool. We let that dry, and we came back and we added another layer. And then we added our opaques today. I'll get back to that in a minute. So the next picture that we worked on was a subtractive city drawing as well, and this one is done in charcoal rather than the graphite of this first one. So we laid down charcoal. This time I used our large stick charcoal, which is very fat. So when I first laid down my entire sheet, it's kind of at a value of 5.5 or 6, much darker than the skinnier vine charcoal. I selected this one because I want to go to Venice someday, and I actually enjoyed this. It was a little bit of a booger to do all these tiny little balcony things. We had to erase out all the lights and the highlights, and so I had to correct myself a multitude of times up here. These lines are sort of straight, but they're not really. This is a 3-point perspective. It's almost a 2-point because these are almost vertical lines, but they're actually not. It's like you're looking up and they are almost parallel, but not quite. So You can see this lamppost is slightly tilted over too because it is a 3-point perspective. The city in the background, you're supposed to fade a little bit and not show as much detail so that it recedes into the distance. So I left some of the details out and I added in these little blinds up here. But anyway, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And it was really, really hard though, but I did go overtime on this one, spent a lot of extra time because I wanted it to look good. And I went back to the painting, worked some more on the painting, and then I started the final drawing of this week, which was a crowd drawing in charcoal. And the idea for this is to subtract out the shapes in between the people and not to look at the people, not to sit there and draw an outline, but to actually go in and just see this shape, this shape, this shape. One idea the teacher tells us is to turn our drawing upside down and then you can better see the shapes that are in between the people. I didn't do that, but I kind of regret not doing that because I feel like it would have been easier. I really, really struggled with this because there were so many people that were a little bit blurred out in the background. I like things to be crisp. I like to see what I'm looking at, and I couldn't really tell. For example, this girl in the front, I couldn't even tell if this head was somebody that was farther back behind her because it was so blurry in the original image. I think it turned out pretty okay, even though I really, really struggled. I don't think I'm going to be drawing crowds very much because it's not my favorite. I wouldn't mind a few people in a picture, but to have this many is like crazy. But you know what? But I'm so excited to have tackled really difficult projects this week, and I now understand what Ellie Milan was saying when we started this week, that this was going to be the hardest week we've had yet to date. I actually thought it would be easier for me since I have drawn some perspective drawings in interior design, but it was completely different than what we did in school. Here's the final painting that I worked on, and this is the Subtractive City of the Delmonico building. So I just finished adding all the highlights, adding the cold wax paste to the snow in the foreground. I probably added a little bit too much, but this is my second time working with this, and I'm not really sure how much I should do. It looks a little bit busy in the front. I don't want everybody just to be staring at the snow. So I did add warms all the way throughout this, and the colors that I added on these sides are actually cools to help them recede into the distance. This one I left pretty abstract because in the original it is abstract, but that is it. That's the final. And as I said before, I had really dreaded starting this painting, but I found that I actually enjoyed it. It was not as hard as I thought it was going to be, so I think I would tackle architecture again in the future. I'm so glad to have completed this week and tackled some really difficult projects. It makes me feel like I've grown as an artist and I've increased my skills. And so I would encourage you, what type of things are you really scared about drawing? Why don't you go pick out a subject matter right now and get to work? And you know what, if it doesn't turn out great, that's fine. At least you tried and you worked at it. Because the only way you're going to get better at drawing is to actually do things that you can't already do well. That way you're increasing your skills. So let's call it a wrap. This is the end of week 6 in the Milan Art Mastery Program, and thanks for watching. If you want to see more of these videos, I will try to make some as the weeks go by, and hit subscribe so that you can see more, and please go make some art today.